Exposed my dad's affair. He tried to bribe me into silence, but I told my stepmom anyway. Now she took half his fortune and his mistress ditched him. I had the unfortunate luck of being born into what feels like a real-life movie, a drama so intense that even the most toxic families in films can't compare. My family isn't just dysfunctional, they've set a new standard for chaos. I wouldn't wish this kind of upbringing on my worst enemy, but here I am, living through it because, well, what else can I do? For the longest time, I held on to hope that things would improve, but I've come to realize that some people thrive in toxicity. If there isn't drama, they'll go out of their way to create it. My dad is one of those people. He enjoys playing the victim, and if life isn't handing him reasons to feel wronged, he'll stir up trouble just to put himself in that position. For context, I'm a 30-year-old woman, and my parents divorced when I was just 3. According to my dad, he and my mom were never meant to be together. Getting married was the biggest mistake of their lives. They were young, rushed into marriage, and had me within a year. At first, things seemed fine, but the cracks started showing when my mom realized that parenthood wasn't just about dressing up a baby for cute pictures. Raising a child is a lifelong responsibility, and she wasn't built for it. Instead of facing that truth, she panicked and ran. That's the short version. The longer one? My biological mom was stunning. Men were drawn to her like moths to a flame, willing to chase her to the ends of the earth. Somehow, she ended up with my dad. They had me, and for a while, she tried to play the role of a wife and mother. But it didn't take long for her to realize she wasn't satisfied. She hated the idea of commitment, of belonging to anyone in any capacity. What she wanted was her freedom back. And instead of handling it maturely, she chose to cheat repeatedly. Every time she was caught, she'd apologize, but the cycle would start all over again. Dad believes she got caught on purpose. He thinks she wanted him to be the one to end things because she didn't have the courage to walk away herself. But Dad was obsessed with her, so he put up with it again and again. Their relationship was a disaster, and I honestly don't know how he endured it as long as he did. Eventually, though, even she had enough. One day, she vanished, leaving us behind for one of her many affairs. No one knows which man she ran off with, and since then, we've heard nothing from her. Dad tried everything to find her, reaching out in every way he could, but she disappeared like a ghost. I was too young to remember her. I was just 3, so to me, she's nothing more than a shadow from my dad's past. I don't consider her my mother. She doesn't deserve that title. After she left, Dad buried himself in work. He started a business that eventually became massively successful, making him a lot of money. To this day, I think that if my biological mother had known how wealthy he'd become, she would have come crawling back. But thankfully, she didn't. Because soon after, Dad met an incredible woman, the woman who would become my real mother, my real family. I love her even more than I love my dad. She was never just a stepmother, she was the best parent anyone could ask for. Dad met her when I was 6, and by the time I turned 8, they were married. At first, I was hesitant around her. I didn't know what to expect, but she was patient with me, never forcing anything. Slowly, I warmed up to her, so much so that I practically became her shadow. She took me to the movies, to the arcade, spent time with me just because she wanted to, not because she had to. Long before they were married, she was already treating me like her own. Years later, when I asked her why she put in so much effort with me, she told me that she never just wanted to be my dad's wife, she wanted to be my family. She knew what she was signing up for and wanted to do justice to the role she was stepping into. And she did, without a doubt. 2 years after she and Dad got married, she gave birth to twin boys, my brothers, Marshall and Elliot. When they were born, I was nervous. I thought that now, she had her real children, and I would no longer be as important to her. But she proved me wrong. As soon as she came home from the hospital, she called me over, looked me in the eyes, and told me that I was her first child. Nothing, no one, could ever change that. I hugged her and cried like a baby. I adored my brothers from the start and was very hands-on in helping raise them. Even though taking care of twins was exhausting, Mom always made time for me. We still had our weekly movie nights, even when I told her it was okay to skip them because I knew how drained she must have been. But she insisted, not because of me, but because she wanted to make sure I never felt pushed aside. She wanted me to know, without a doubt, that I was still her child and nothing had changed. For as long as I can remember, we were a happy little family. With Dad constantly busy running his business, it was mostly the 4 of us: Mom, me, Elliot, and Marshall, wrapped up in our own little world. We thought Dad was working hard to provide for the family, sacrificing time with us so we could have a good life. But recently, we discovered that he was busy with something entirely different. When I went off to college, I got a full scholarship, so I never had to touch the college fund Dad had set aside for me. He told me he'd give me the money later, when I had an actual use for it, maybe to buy a house or invest in something worthwhile. I agreed. It made sense. After graduation, I landed a job in another state, but I stayed in close contact with my family, especially Marshall and Elliot. I knew everything going on in their lives, and we never lost touch. Then, about a month ago, on my way to work, I saw something that stopped me cold. Dad. He was in my city without telling me, and he wasn't alone. He was with a woman I had never seen before. She wasn't family, that much I knew. And the moment I spotted them, something in my gut told me something was off. Why was he here? Why hadn't he mentioned anything? I called him right then and there, watching as he pulled out his phone and saw my name on the screen. He answered, and I kept my voice as casual as I could, asking him what he was up to. Without hesitation, he lied. Told me he was busy, said he'd call me later. That's when I knew. My father was having an affair. I made up my mind right then and there, I needed to know exactly what my father was up to. So, I followed him, staying just far enough behind to avoid suspicion. I watched as he and the woman checked into a hotel, and without hesitation, I booked a room there too. Keeping an eye on their movements, I managed to catch a glimpse of his room number. A plan formed in my head, and I walked right up to his door, knocking with confidence while pretending to be housekeeping. He fell for it. The second he opened the door and saw me standing there, his face drained of color, like someone had just pointed a gun at his head. Without giving him a chance to react, I pushed my way inside and took a seat on the bed like I owned the place. The woman he was with, someone I had never seen before, looked just as shocked. I crossed my arms and stared him down. So, care to explain? He tried to brush me off, acting as if I had no right to interfere in his personal business. But I wasn't having any of it. I told him point blank that if he didn't start talking, I'd call Mom that very moment and lay everything out for her. That rattled him. The tough act crumbled, and finally, he admitted the truth. He had been having an affair with this woman for the past 10 years. 10 years. And according to him, she was the love of his life. I stared at him in disbelief. How could he do this to Mom? The kindest, most selfless woman I had ever known? It takes a special kind of cruel to betray someone like her. I asked him, point blank, why he felt the need to cheat. His response? He didn't have the heart to divorce her because she would have nowhere to go if he left. I was stunned. Of all the pathetic excuses, that was the one he chose? I told him, without mincing words, that he was a disgrace of a man for doing this to Mom. And that no matter what he said, I was telling her the truth. Suddenly, he switched tactics, scrambling for a new defense. He claimed that after the twins were born, he and Mom had drifted apart. Over time, their marriage had supposedly turned into nothing more than a roommate situation, and because of that, they had agreed to an open relationship. I wasn't buying it. I told him flat out that open relationships don't work that way. They don't involve secretly maintaining a committed relationship on the side for an entire decade. If that's what he thought, then he was either an idiot or a liar. And I wasn't about to let him play me for a fool. He kept repeating that it was an open marriage, so I called his bluff. I said, great. I'll just call Mom and ask her. Panic flashed across his face. He immediately insisted that I shouldn't do that. And just like that, the whole charade fell apart. The argument escalated. I called him and his mistress every name in the book, my anger boiling over. I told him that he had done to Mom exactly what my biological mother had done to him. And that was when he lost it. He snapped back that the situations were completely different and that I'd understand when I was older. I laughed in his face. I'm 30, Dad. How much older do I need to be to see this for what it is? But he wouldn't back down. He claimed that my biological mother was different because she had cheated for fun, because she was a serial cheater who never cared about anyone but herself. His situation, on the other hand, was justified because he was actually in love. I shook my head in disbelief. If these delusions help you sleep at night, then by all means, keep lying to yourself. But you're not going to gaslight me into seeing things your way. I made it clear I was telling Mom, no matter what, there was nothing he could do to stop me. And that was when he showed just how low he was willing to go. He physically blocked the door, stopping me from leaving. Then he looked me dead in the eyes and threatened me. If I told Mom, he would cut me out of the inheritance. I would never see a single penny of his wealth. I stared at him, stunned. And then, I started laughing. This is what you've come to? Bribing me to cover your tracks? You think I care about your dirty money? You can shove your wealth right up your ass. And because he realized that the threat hadn't worked, he tried the opposite approach, bribery. He offered me full ownership of his business at the expense of Marshall and Elliot. That was the moment I lost all remaining respect for him. I told him straight to his face that if he thought I would ever betray my own brothers for money, then he clearly didn't know me at all. And that I was beyond grateful that Mom had been the one to raise me, because if I had inherited his moral compass, I'd be giving the devil a run for his money. I stormed out of the room, and as soon as I was alone, I broke down. The weight of everything crashed down on me all at once. My world felt like it had shattered, and suddenly, I was carrying a burden that I never asked for. But I didn't have time to sit in my emotions. I needed to act fast. I knew my father. He was going to twist the truth, manipulate Mom, and feed her some half-baked version of events that would make reality seem inconsistent. I had to get to her before he did. So I booked a flight, put in for a week-long leave from work, and left that very night. This wasn't something that could be handled over the phone. I needed to be there, in person. Mom was going to break when she heard this, and with Marshall and Elliot away at college, she couldn't be left alone to deal with it. When I arrived the next day, Mom was overjoyed to see me. She thought I was surprising her with an unexpected visit, and I had to fight back tears. She had spent her entire life devoted to a man who had been living a double life for the past 10 years. She had played the role of a loving wife, a devoted mother, and the glue that held our home together while he had been betraying her in the worst possible way. The rage I felt in that moment was something I had never experienced before. If Dad had been standing in front of me, I don't know if I could have stopped myself from attacking him. But I kept my emotions in check and simply asked, "When is Dad coming back?" She told me that he was supposed to be away on a week-long business trip but had called her last night to say he was coming home early. She was thrilled about it. She thought it meant I'd get to see him too. I had no idea how I was going to break this news to her. But I knew, without a doubt, that I had to. I was ready to lose my inheritance. I was ready to watch Mom's world crumble. But I couldn't stay silent. I owed her the truth. And I was going to tell her right in front of him. That night, he walked through the door and froze the moment he saw me. He knew what was coming. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I sat them both down and told Mom that there was something she needed to hear. Then, I let it all out. I told her everything, the moment I saw Dad with another woman, the way he lied to me when I called him, how I followed him, and what I found out at the hotel. I even laid out the ridiculous excuse he had given me about their so-called open relationship. I made sure not to leave out a single detail. At first, she was stunned, completely in shock and unwilling to believe it. But before she could process it, Dad saw her hesitation and jumped on the opportunity to spin some pathetic excuse. But she wasn't having it. She cut him off mid-sentence, and that's when the real fight began. I had rarely seen my mother angry in my life. She was always the composed one, the gentle and patient one, never the type to yell or lose control of her emotions. But not that night. That night, she was furious. They fought like two lions locked in a battle, screaming at each other for what must have been over an hour. It wasn't a conversation, it was pure, unfiltered rage from both sides, accusations flying back and forth. I just sat there, listening to them tear each other apart, knowing there was no coming back from this. Mom isn't the kind of woman who can forgive or tolerate infidelity. By the time the yelling subsided, she made her stance clear, she was done. She told him that their marriage was over, but for the sake of the kids, she wanted the divorce to be handled with dignity. But Dad? Dad had become someone I no longer recognized. He flat out refused to let her leave him. He told her she was being irrational, that she needed to be talked out of it. And then, the real kicker, he decided to drag Marshall and Elliot into it. That very night, he booked their tickets home, saying they needed to talk some sense into their mother. The next 2 days in that house were absolute hell. I stayed by Mom's side the entire time, while Dad moved into the spare room. We didn't speak to him, and he didn't speak to us. The air was thick with tension, and I was counting down the hours until my brothers arrived, hoping they would see the truth and stand by Mom. I was wrong. Dad went to the airport to pick them up, and I don't know what kind of nonsense he fed them on the way back, but by the time they walked through that door, they were already brainwashed. Mom and I had both assumed they would be furious with Dad, that they would immediately take her side and throw him out. But instead, the opposite happened. Elliot, speaking for both of them, told Mom to suck it up and not break the family. I wanted to slap them both. Dad sat there, smug and self-satisfied, knowing exactly what he had done. I stood up and asked my brothers outright if Dad had used their college funds as leverage over them. They didn't answer. I kept pressing, demanding to know if that was the reason they were suddenly backing him, but they just kept parroting whatever speech Dad had rehearsed with them. I told them I would help them get loans, that I would personally do everything I could to make sure they didn't have to rely on Dad's money, that they didn't need to support him out of fear. But they didn't say a word. They just sat there, silent and unmoving. I couldn't even bring myself to look at Mom. I knew how much this must have crushed her. She had raised them better than this. But Dad? He had an advantage over them that he didn't have over me: financial control. He knew he couldn't manipulate me because I wasn't dependent on him. But Marshall and Elliot? He could cut them off at any moment, and they knew it. Mom finally spoke, her voice steady but cold. She asked them outright if they genuinely believed she should stay married to a cheater. And they said yes. She took a deep breath and told them she was sorry they felt that way, but she wasn't going to stay. She made it clear that she was filing for divorce, no matter who was on her side. I immediately stepped in and told her she had my full support, that she didn't have to go through this alone. Dad, sensing that he was losing his grip, sent the boys to their rooms and turned to Mom with a sneer. In the most condescending tone, he told her to reconsider, warning her that if she went through with this, the blame for breaking the family apart would be on her. She didn't even flinch. She told him that was a burden she was willing to bear, but she would never stay married to a man who had betrayed her like this. That was the end of the discussion. Dad stormed out of the room, furious that he couldn't control her anymore. I've since returned to work, but I keep in close contact with Mom. I hate that I can't be there for her right now, but I have my own responsibilities to juggle. More than anything, I just wish Marshall and Elliot would come to their senses. I know they're scared about their future if Dad takes away their funds, but I also know they're old enough to recognize right from wrong. Mom needs their support more than ever, and they're too afraid to stand up to him. Update. Mom officially filed for divorce. She tried to handle things civilly, but then she discovered just how low Dad was willing to sink. He actually went through with it. He cut me out of the inheritance. Mom found out that if she proceeded with the divorce, I would be left with absolutely nothing, not a single penny from the family wealth or my college fund. He had the audacity to tell her that since I was taking her side, he would ensure I was financially ruined. This was his last card, his final attempt to manipulate her into staying. He knew Mom loved me more than anything, and he banked on that love to stop her. He knew she would never make a decision that would jeopardize my future, and he tried to weaponize that against her. Too bad for him. I don't need his scraps. He has no control over me, and I refuse to let him use me to manipulate Mom. She called me in tears, saying that she was considering staying because she didn't want me to suffer. But there was no way I was going to let that happen. Hearing Mom cry over me instead of herself shattered my heart. Even in the middle of her own pain, even after everything Dad had put her through, she was still thinking about me. She was willing to stay trapped in a miserable marriage just to protect my future. I couldn't let that happen. I told her not to worry about me, that I was doing well on my own and didn't need a single cent of Dad's dirty money. I reassured her that she needed to go through with the divorce, that she deserved to be free from him. She broke down, thanking me for standing by her. I told her I always would. And then things got really interesting. Mom hired a sharp, ruthless lawyer, someone who wasn't going to let Dad get away with anything. She didn't share all the legal details with me at first, but then yesterday, Dad called me, absolutely fuming. He was screaming down the phone, blaming me for ruining his life by supporting Mom, saying I was no daughter of his if I let this continue. I had no idea what he was talking about. So, I called Mom. To my surprise, she sounded happy. She had moved out of the house and was staying with a friend, and when I asked her what was going on, she finally told me everything. And let me tell you, I couldn't stop laughing. Turns out, karma had finally caught up with my father, and it hit him like a freight train. Back when they were married, before Dad's business became successful, Mom had sold her jewelry and family heirlooms to help fund his company. None of us had known this. She told me that she never felt the need to bring it up because, back then, she trusted him. She believed in him and wanted to help him build something for himself. Never in a million years did she think that the man she sacrificed so much for would turn around and betray her like this. Well, guess what? When her lawyer found out about her financial contribution, he went after Dad with everything he had. Now, Mom is legally demanding 50% of the business, because, technically, she was one of the original investors. And here's where it gets even worse for Dad: his business isn't structured in a way that allows for a partnership. He either has to buy Mom out or shut everything down. He's completely screwed. And now it all makes sense. This is why he had looked so panicked when I first confronted him. He knew that if Mom ever found out the full truth and walked away, she wouldn't just leave him, she'd take half of everything he built. And now that it was actually happening, he was desperate to undo it. Too bad. Mom isn't interested in compromises. She's done with him, and from the way things are going, the judge is heavily leaning in her favor. Dad's grand affair with the love of his life has turned out to be the most expensive mistake he's ever made. It's cost him his family. And now, it's cost him his entire career. And I couldn't be happier. Men like him, men who take their wives for granted, exploit them, and treat them as disposable, deserve everything that's coming to them. Update. The divorce has been finalized. Mom is officially free, and she now owns half of everything Dad once claimed as his. And Dad? He is furious. He hasn't stopped ranting to anyone who will listen, but the sad thing is, no one cares. He's burning through every last bit of goodwill he has left, losing people left and right. No one wants to deal with his self-inflicted misery. And the best part? The love of his life, the woman he threw his entire family away for, left him. The moment she found out that his net worth had been slashed in half, she was out the door. The second the allure of being with a rich, married man disappeared, so did she. So, at the end of it all, Dad lost everything. His marriage. His wealth. His respect. And for what? A woman who couldn't even be bothered to stick around when things got tough? He is, without a doubt, the biggest loser in all of this. And I'm so damn happy about it. Once everything was finalized, I sent him one last message. I told him that as far as I was concerned, he was dead to me. That from this day forward, he had no reason to contact me. Then, I blocked him. And honestly? I don't regret it. I don't want anything to do with him ever again. He can rot in the filth of his own choices for all I care. Now, for the most interesting part of all. Mom has publicly declared that her entire share of the assets will go to me. She knows that Dad has essentially bought Marshall and Elliot's loyalty by keeping their financial security under his control. She knows that he never intended to give me anything, and she's making sure I don't lose out because of it. The moment Marshall and Elliot found out, they called me up, demanding that I be fair and split my share with them. Because we're family, they said. Family looks out for each other, they said. I laughed. I reminded them that Mom was their family too, but when she was sobbing, begging for their support, they had nothing to say. They had no argument for that. But they still kept pushing. And then, Marshall said something I'll never forget. He said that because I wasn't Mom's real daughter, I had no right to that money. That they were Mom's real family. I turned to Elliot. Do you feel the same way? He hesitated. But then, he said yes. That hurt more than anything. I know they said it out of anger. I know they didn't truly mean it. But I don't care. It was cruel. It was heartless. And I don't think I can ever forgive them for it. I told them that if I wasn't their real family, then they had no business begging me for scraps now. Then, I hung up and blocked them too. I know they're still young. I know they were under Dad's influence. But at 20 years old, you should have at least some sense of decency. Right now, I just need space. I need peace. I need stability. Maybe one day, I'll find it in me to forgive them. Maybe, in time, we'll work things out. But right now? Right now, my priority is Mom. She has been strong through this entire ordeal. And now, it's my turn to be strong for her. To support her. To love her. Just like she has always done for me.